Well, last week you were astonished when the Secretary of the Federal Department of Health, Professor Brendan Murphy, and the Workplace Gender Equality Agency couldn't offer a simple definition of a woman. Senator Antich posed the simple question, what is a woman? Just notice, I thought you've all demanded to see this again. Notice the completely blank faces as proof of how ruptured society has become. Have a look at this.
With a very simple question for the department, and that is one which has troubled me for a great deal of time with the bureaucracy here. Can someone please provide me with a definition of what a woman is? Department of Health. Definition of a man, definition of a woman. Anyone?
It's pretty basic.
Basic stuff. Professor Murphy.
I think there are a variety of definitions, and I think
just a simple
perhaps to give a more fulsome answer, we should take that on notice.
You're going to take on notice the question of what a woman is.
No, well, there are a variety. It's a very contested space at the moment, Senator.
It's not just a woman who's born a woman.
But there are definitions in terms of how people identify.
That's unbelievable, isn't it? Well, it doesn't get any better. New South Wales government ministers were advised in a Respect at Work training session 2 weeks ago to avoid the word mate. And this advice was given during training sessions organised by the New South Wales Department of Premier and Cabinet. As one minister said, we're not allowed to have individual opinions, we have to engage in group thought, and now we can't call someone mate. He said this is straight out of 1984. Let's bring in Mark Latham. Mark, where does all of this end?
Well, it's hard to know, Alan. Calling someone a mate is a great Australian statement of friendship. And we need more friendship in our society at the moment, people coming closer together. To have mates and you stand by them is a very good thing. It's an Australian tradition. But those seminars you're talking about, funded by the New South Wales taxpayer, the ministers were also told by the so-called facilitator that to say to someone in the workplace, look, you know, you're not going all that well, you really need to lift your game, your performance is not all that good, is bullying. Which basically means it's a licence for incompetence and bludging off. I mean, these people are supposed to be running the state of New South Wales, making the trains run on time, fix up the health emergency departments, lift our school academic results that have been sliding downwards. So imagine being in a ministerial office or a department where it's bullying to say, listen, you're not going that well, you've got to lift your game.
I know. Where's this heading? Look, to matters as important, you made the point recently that Labor will be relying on the preference swap with the Greens to win the election and that, quote, we all know that voting Labor means getting the Greens. But you ask, what about the other side of politics? How do we explain the curious way in which Scott Morrison seems to have forgotten how he won the last election? Mark, your point. What do you mean by that?
Well, I think if you vote Liberal, you get teal, because consistently over the last 3 years, Scott Morrison, who hasn't visited a coal mine in this term of Parliament, he won the election on mining jobs, he hasn't visited a coal mine, and he's crab walked away closer to the Frydenberg agenda, the Dave Sharma, the Zimmerman agenda. These guys are always on the phone to Morrison whenever there's a teal threat in their electorates to say the Liberal Party has got to go further green and further left. How did they end up at net zero 2050, as you described it, Alan, accurately, as an economic suicide note for the nation? How did they end up at net zero 2050, a policy that is teal in these electorates where Frydenberg and others are in a state of panic? How did they end up with more money for the ABC, an agreed 3-year funding agreement for the ABC? How did Morrison late last year write a letter to Albanese saying he'd lift the Sex Discrimination Act exemption for non-government schools, which is basically a licence for the gender activists and the human rights tribunals to set upon these religious schools, adjudicating on things like, can a boy go into the girls' toilet? So, you know, there's a madness about Morrison moving to the left. He has,
and these were the policies that Turnbull was pushing. Turnbull was pushing and he lost 14 seats.